The woman at the dusty gate carried a secret no cowboy could ignore. By sunrise, Nathaniel Cross had already decided the day had nothing left to give him. Below the hill, his land stretched wide and dry beneath the Texas sun. Cattle moved like dark spots across the yellow grass. The creek cut through the valley, thin but still alive. Horses shifted near the corral, tails flicking at flies. Men worked in the distance, their voices carried faintly on the morning air. It was all his. The land, the herd, the barns, the house, the respect of men who spoke carefully when he was near. And still, every room inside him felt empty. Nathaniel was 44 years old and looked older when the light hit him wrong. His hair had gone gray at the temples. His face had the hard lines of a man who had learned not to ask for mercy from heaven or from people. 8 years had passed since Clara died in childbirth, and the baby boy with her. 8 years since laughter had left the house. 8 years since Nathaniel had stopped sleeping through the night. Some men drank to forget. Nathaniel worked. He worked until his hands bled and his back burned. He worked until even grief had to wait its turn. But grief was patient. It always came back. A horse snorted near the barn. A screen door creaked somewhere behind him. Then his foreman's voice broke the quiet. "Boss." Nathaniel did not turn. "What is it, Eli?" Eli Mercer stood at the foot of the porch steps, hat in his hands. He was a broad man with dust on his beard and worry in his eyes. Eli had been with him 9 years and had never been a man to waste words. "There's a woman at the front gate." Nathaniel stared across the ranch. "Send her on." "I tried." "Try harder." Eli shifted. "She says she's looking for work." "We're not hiring." "I told her that too." "Then why is she still there?" Eli looked back toward the long road that led to the gate. "Because she has been standing there since before first light, and she does not look like she has another mile left in her." Nathaniel finally turned. Eli held his gaze, which meant this was not ordinary. The foreman was not soft. He had seen storms, sickness, bad falls, and hard winters. If a stranger at the gate had troubled him enough to come to the porch twice, there was a reason. Nathaniel set the cold coffee on the rail. "Is she alone?" "Yes." "Horse?" "No." "Wagon?" "No." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. "She walked here." "Looks that way." The front gate was far enough from town to make that answer sit heavy between them. Anyone walking the open country in this heat was either desperate, foolish, or running from something. Sometimes all three were the same thing. Nathaniel stepped off the porch and crossed the yard. His boots stirred little clouds of dust. The sun was climbing, already sharp enough to sting the back of his neck. As he neared the gate, the woman came into clear view. She stood with both hands around the handle of a worn carpet bag. Her dress had once been blue, but hard travel had faded it almost gray. The hem was torn. Dust clung to her skirt and boots. A plain bonnet shaded most of her face, but not enough to hide the tiredness there. She was not old, maybe 28, maybe 30. Yet sorrow had put years around her mouth. Her lips were pressed together like she had learned long ago that speaking too much brought trouble. A loose strand of brown hair touched her cheek, moving softly in the wind. Nathaniel stopped a few feet from her. "Name." She lifted her eyes for only a moment. "Grace Bell." Her voice was quiet, but it did not shake. "What kind of work are you after, Miss Bell?" "Any honest work you have." "That is not an answer." "I can cook, clean, mend shirts, tend a garden if the soil allows it. I can make bread, keep accounts well enough, and care for sick folks if there is need." Nathaniel studied her hands. They were rough, red at the knuckles, with small burns and needle marks. Not the hands of a woman who only talked about work. "Where did you come from?" Her fingers tightened on the bag. "East." "That is a direction, not a place." "Yes, sir." Eli stood a little behind Nathaniel, silent but watching. Nathaniel's jaw hardened. You running from the law? Grace looked at the dust between them. No, sir. A husband. Her face changed so quickly most men would have missed it. Nathaniel did not. A shadow passed through her eyes, then vanished behind that still, careful look. I am looking for work, she said. That is not what I asked. No, sir. A gust of wind pushed dust along the road. Somewhere near the barn, a horse stamped. Nathaniel should have told Eli to give her water and send her away. A ranch was no place for secrets. Secrets brought riders, questions, trouble at sundown. But then Grace swayed. It was small, just a slight bend at the knees before she caught herself. Pride held her upright more than strength. Nathaniel saw the truth then, not all of it, not the names, not the blood, not the nights behind her, but he saw enough. This woman had reached the end of something. Maybe the end of a road, maybe the end of fear, maybe the end of herself. He knew that place. He lived there. You will get no wages for the first month, he said. Room and board only. If you work well, we will speak again after that. Grace blinked once, as if she had expected no mercy and did not trust the sound of it. Yes, sir. There is a small cabin behind the house. 1 room, stove, bed, table. You will cook breakfast before sunup and supper at 6. The house needs cleaning. Laundry once a week. You keep clear of the men unless work calls for it. If trouble follows you here, I expect to know before it reaches my door. Her throat moved. I understand. Nathaniel turned to Eli. Show her the cabin. Eli nodded. Grace took 1 step through the gate, then stopped. For the first time, she looked fully at Nathaniel. There was fear in her eyes, yes, but beneath it was something harder, something that had refused to die. Mr. Cross, she said softly, thank you. Nathaniel did not answer. He only walked back toward the house, feeling the strange weight of those 2 words follow him across the yard. Behind him, Eli spoke gently to the woman, leading her toward the cabin. Nathaniel reached the porch and looked once over his shoulder. Grace Bell stood in the dust with her worn bag in one hand, staring at the ranch house like it was not a place to work, but a place where a person might finally stop running. And for reasons Nathaniel did not want to name, that frightened him more than sending her away ever could have. Grace Bell did not unpack right away. She stood inside the little cabin with her hand still on the door latch, listening to the ranch breathe around her. Outside, a horse shifted near the rail. Somewhere beyond the barn, a man laughed, then another voice told him to hush. The sound of cattle came low from the pasture, mixed with the soft scrape of wind against the wooden walls. The cabin was plain, but it was more than she had expected. A narrow bed sat against one wall with a folded quilt at the foot. A black stove stood in the corner. There was a small table, 2 chairs, a wash basin, and 1 window facing the back of the main house. The floorboards creaked when she stepped across them, but they were solid. Solid mattered. For nearly 7 months, Grace had slept wherever she could. A church cellar in Missouri, a hayloft outside Abilene, a widow's kitchen in a town whose name she had tried to forget. Twice, she had slept beneath wagons with her bag under her head and 1 hand wrapped around a kitchen knife. A room with a door she could latch felt almost too generous to trust. She set the carpetbag on the table and opened it. There was not much inside. 1 spare dress, a comb with a cracked handle, a needle case, a worn Bible with her mother's name written inside the cover, a small cloth bundle tied with string. She touched that bundle last, then quickly pushed it beneath the folded dress as if it had burned her fingers. Not yet. She sat on the bed and pulled off 1 boot. Pain shot through her foot so sharp she bit the inside of her cheek. The stocking was stuck to her skin. She peeled it away slowly, breathing through her nose. Blisters had broken across her heel. Dried blood marked the cloth. Her other foot was worse. Grace stared at them without surprise. Pain had become a language she understood well. She washed the wounds at the pump behind the cabin. Cold water ran pink over the dirt. She did not cry. Tears had been beaten out of her long before the road had finished its work. When the bleeding slowed, she wrapped her feet in strips torn from an old petticoat and stood again. There was work to do. By noon, she entered the main house through the back door. The kitchen stopped her in place. It was not dirty in the way poor houses were dirty. There was food in the pantry, good iron pans hanging from hooks, flour in barrels, coffee in tins, dried apples, beans, salt pork, and jars of preserves someone had once cared enough to put up. But a fine coat of dust lay over everything. The stove had not been polished in months. The shelves were crowded without order. A mouse had chewed the corner of a flour sack. The air smelled of old grease, ashes, and a loneliness so thick it might have had a name. Grace took off her bonnet and hung it on a peg. Then she rolled up her sleeves. She worked like a woman trying to save herself by saving a room. She scrubbed the stove until black iron showed through the dullness. She swept dust from corners. She sorted jars and sacks, threw away what had spoiled, wiped shelves with hot water, and opened the window to let the stale air escape. Every movement steadied her. The ache in her feet faded behind the comfort of useful hands. By late afternoon, a pot of beef stew simmered on the stove. Biscuits browned in a pan. Coffee sat ready near the fire. She found a clean cloth in a drawer and set the dining table with more care than the house seemed used to receiving. Nathaniel Cross came in at 6. He stopped in the doorway. Grace stood beside the table with her hands folded in front of her apron. She had washed her face, pinned her hair, and changed into the better of her 2 dresses. Better only meant fewer tears in the cloth, but it was the best she had. Nathaniel looked at the table, then at the swept floor, then toward the kitchen where the smell of supper drifted warm and rich. "You did all this today?" "Yes, sir." "You were told to get settled." "I did." His eyes moved to her hands. They were red from hot water but steady. He sat at the table without another word. Grace filled his bowl, placed biscuits beside it, and stepped back. Nathaniel picked up his spoon, then paused. "Where is yours?" "I will eat after." "No." Grace looked at him. He nodded toward the chair across from him. "Sit." "That is not necessary, Mr. Cross." "It is in my house." Something in his tone told her arguing would only waste strength. She sat carefully, keeping her eyes low. Nathaniel pushed the biscuit plate toward her. For a while they ate in silence. Grace listened to every sound, the scrape of his spoon against the bowl, the faint crack of cooling wood in the wall, the wind pressing at the window. She had learned to read a man by small things. How hard he set down a cup, how loudly he breathed when displeased, whether silence around him felt peaceful or dangerous. Nathaniel Cross's silence felt heavy, but not cruel. That confused her. "This is good," he said at last. "Thank you. Where did you learn?" Grace's hand tightened around her spoon. "From my mother." "She living?" "No, sir." "I'm sorry." Grace nodded once. It was a long time ago. Nathaniel watched her as if he heard all the words she had not said. She did not like it. Men who looked too closely usually wanted something. After supper, she stood to clear the dishes, but he rose too. "I can do that," she said quickly. "I know." He carried his bowl into the kitchen anyway. Grace followed, unsure what to make of him. Men who owned ranches did not usually carry dishes. Men who looked like Nathaniel Cross did not usually help hired women wash them. Yet he took a towel and dried each plate after she rinsed it. They worked side by side in the small kitchen, not touching, not speaking. Once, his sleeve brushed her arm and Grace flinched before she could stop herself. Nathaniel noticed. He did not ask why. He only stepped half a pace away and gave her more room. That small kindness nearly broke her. When the last cup was set on the shelf, he hung the towel on its peg. "Breakfast before sunrise," he said. "Most days I leave early." "Yes, sir. If any of the men trouble you, tell Eli." She looked up. "Not you." His mouth tightened, almost like regret. "Tell Eli first. He is better at speaking gently than I am." Grace did not know what answer to give. Nathaniel moved toward the hall, then stopped. "The cabin latch works." "Yes." "Use it." Then he left. Grace remained in the kitchen after his footsteps faded. Her hands rested on the edge of the wash basin. Through the window, she could see the little cabin waiting in the dark. For the first time in months, she had eaten at a table. She had washed dishes beside a man who did not raise his voice. She had been given a bed, a latch, and work enough to keep memory away for a few hours. It should have made her feel safe. Instead, it made her afraid. Because safe things could be lost. Later that night, inside the cabin, Grace pulled the hidden cloth bundle from her bag. She untied the string with trembling fingers. Inside lay a silver wedding ring, a torn photograph, and a folded notice from a county sheriff back east. She stared at the printed words until they blurred. Then a sound came from outside. Not wind. Not cattle. A footstep, slow and careful, just beyond her door. Grace did not move. The little cabin seemed to hold its breath with her. The lamp flame shook on the table, throwing shadows across the walls. Her wedding ring, the torn photograph, and the sheriff's notice lay open before her like sins waiting to be named. Another soft step sounded outside the door. Grace reached for the kitchen knife she had set beside the basin earlier. Her fingers closed around the handle. She rose slowly, careful not to let the chair scrape the floor. "Who's there?" she called. For a moment, nothing answered. Then came a low voice, "Miss Bell." It was Eli. Grace let out a breath she had not known she was holding, but she did not put the knife down. "What do you want?" "Didn't mean to scare you. Saw your lamp still burning. Thought I should tell you there's a loose board on your porch. Nearly tripped over it when I came to check the latch." "Why were you checking my latch?" A pause followed. She could almost picture him outside with his hat in his hands, wishing he had thought through his words. "Boss told me to make sure the cabin was sound," Eli said. "That's all. Door, windows, roof. I should have done it before dark, but the west fence took longer than expected." Grace looked at the table. The notice seemed to stare back at her. "You can fix it tomorrow," she said. "Yes, ma'am, I'll leave you be." His boots moved away across the dirt. Grace stood still until the sound faded. Only then did she lower the knife. Her knees weakened. She sat back down hard, staring at the door with shame burning in her chest. Eli had come to make sure she was safe, and she had nearly greeted him like an enemy. But that was what fear did. It made every kindness look like a trap until proven otherwise. She folded the sheriff's notice and shoved it back into the cloth bundle. The paper had grown soft from being opened too many times. "Wanted for questioning," it said. Not wanted for murder. Not yet. But Grace knew how fast words could change when men in clean coats and shiny badges decided a woman had defended herself too well. The photograph showed her at 19 beside Daniel Bell, the man whose name she still carried like an iron chain. He had looked handsome then. Fine coat, bright smile, one hand resting on her shoulder like he was proud of her. That was the cruelest part. Grace wrapped the ring and notice back inside the cloth and pushed it deep beneath the mattress. Then she sat on the bed until dawn, the knife beside her, her eyes open to the dark. By morning, her body moved even though her mind felt far away. She made coffee strong and black. She fried salt pork, baked biscuits, and set eggs in a pan. The kitchen felt less lonely in daylight. Dust still sat in the corners she had not reached, but the table was clean and the stove gave off steady heat. Nathaniel came in just as the eastern sky turned pale. His eyes went first to her face. "You sleep?" he asked. "Yes, sir." It was a lie, and from the way his jaw shifted, he knew it. He sat at the table. Grace poured coffee and placed a plate before him. Eli came in a few minutes later with 2 ranch hands, both quiet and hungry. One was young, with red hair and ears too big for his face. The other was older, dark-eyed, with a limp he tried to hide. They removed their hats before sitting, which Grace noticed. "This is Miss Bell," Eli said. "She'll be helping in the house." The young one smiled. "Morning, ma'am, I'm Jesse." The older man nodded. "Cole." Grace gave them a small nod. "Coffee?" "Yes, ma'am," Jesse said quickly, like coffee was the answer to every prayer he had ever made. Breakfast passed with little talk. Nathaniel ate in silence. Eli asked about the herd. Cole answered in short sentences, and Jesse burned his tongue on coffee but tried not to show it. Grace kept busy near the stove, filling cups before anyone asked. It should have felt ordinary. Still, every time boots sounded too close behind her, her shoulders tightened. After the men left, Nathaniel stayed. Grace began clearing plates. "Is something wrong?" "That is my question." She did not look at him. "Nothing is wrong. You held a knife when Eli came to your door last night." Her hand stopped over the dishes. "He told you. He told me he scared you." Grace picked up a plate, carried it to the basin, and set it down too hard. A woman alone has reason to be careful. "I did not say she didn't." That made her turn. Nathaniel stood beside the table, hat in one hand, his face hard but not angry. The morning light cut across him, showing the scar near his chin and the tired lines under his eyes. "I need to know if trouble is coming," he said. Grace felt the hidden bundle beneath her cabin mattress, as if it were tucked against her own ribs. "No trouble that belongs to you. If it comes onto my land, it belongs to me. You should not have hired me." The words came out before she could stop them. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe not." The answer struck harder than a kinder one would have. She looked down. Then he added, "But I did." Grace swallowed. Nathaniel stepped closer, then seemed to remember the way she had flinched the night before. He stopped with space between them. Grace's throat tightened. "Why would you search?" His face changed slightly, almost with irritation, as if the question offended him. "Because you work here now. That is all." Nathaniel picked up his hat. "For now." He left before she could answer. Grace stood alone in the kitchen with her hands wet and her heart beating strangely. "For now." The word stayed with her all day. She cleaned the front room after breakfast. It was a large room with a stone fireplace, 2 worn chairs, a shelf of books, and a piano covered by a sheet. When Grace pulled the sheet back, dust rose in the light. One of the keys was cracked. Another gave no sound when she pressed it, but the piano had once been fine. Someone had loved it. On the mantel sat a small framed portrait of a woman in a pale dress. She had gentle eyes and a soft mouth. Beside the portrait was a tiny pair of knitted baby socks, faded with age. Grace stared at them too long. "That was Clara." Nathaniel's voice came from the doorway. Grace turned quickly. "I'm sorry, I should not have touched anything." "You did not hurt it." He entered slowly, his gaze resting on the portrait. For the first time since Grace had met him, the hardness left his face completely. What remained was worse. Raw sorrow, old but not dead. "She played that piano every Sunday," he said. "Badly." Grace said nothing. Nathaniel's mouth moved almost into a smile, then failed. She knew she played badly, didn't care, said houses needed music more than they needed pride. Grace looked at the baby socks. And those? He followed her gaze. The room went very still. Our son, he said, he never wore them. Grace's chest ached. I'm sorry, she whispered. Nathaniel nodded once, but his eyes remained on the mantel. So am I. Silence settled between them, not empty this time, but full of things neither one could fix. Grace thought of the cloth bundle beneath her mattress. Nathaniel thought of a grave under an oak tree. Two pasts stood in the room with them, quiet as ghosts. For one foolish second, Grace wanted to tell him everything. Then Jessie shouted from outside that a calf had broken through the lower rail, and the moment was gone. Nathaniel turned away. The rancher came back over the grieving man like a door closing. That evening, after supper, Grace found a small scrap of blue cloth on her cabin step. The loose porch board had been fixed. Beside it sat a note in Eli's rough hand. No need to fear the porch now, ma'am. Grace held the note for a long while. It was such a small thing, a board fixed, a warning given, a kindness with nothing asked back. If this small moment touched your heart, stay with Grace a little longer, because some wounds do not heal with grand promises. Sometimes they begin healing with a repaired board in the dark. She folded the note and placed it beside her mother's Bible. Then, for the first time since arriving at Iron Creek Ranch, Grace latched the door not because she feared what might enter, but because she wanted to believe something inside was worth protecting. Outside, beneath a sky full of cold stars, Nathaniel Cross stood at the edge of the yard, looking toward her cabin. He had not meant to stop there. He had only been walking back from the barn. But the glow in her window held him still. After a moment, he removed his hat, lowered his head, and whispered a prayer so quiet even he barely heard it. Lord, don't let me fail, another woman who needed saving. He thought no one heard. But inside the cabin, Grace stood near the window with one hand over her mouth, and for the first time in years, tears filled her eyes. Grace did not sleep after hearing Nathaniel's prayer. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the window long after his shadow had left the yard. The words stayed with her. Don't let me fail, another woman who needed saving. No man had ever prayed over her that way. Daniel had prayed in church with his head bowed and his voice humble, then gone home and turned mean before supper. Men could use holy words like clean shirts, wearing them where others could see while hiding the dirt underneath. But Nathaniel had not known anyone was listening. That made the prayer dangerous. Truth was always dangerous to a woman who had survived lies. By morning, Grace told herself she must have misunderstood. Maybe he had been speaking about Clara. Maybe grief had put strange words in his mouth. Maybe she had no right to hold them close like a gift. Still, when she entered the kitchen before dawn, she moved quieter than usual. She made coffee, sliced bacon, and mixed biscuit dough. Her hands knew the work. Her thoughts did not. Every time the back door creaked, her heart lifted and warned itself in the same breath. Nathaniel came in wearing dust on his boots and weariness on his face. He must have been out before sunrise checking the lower pasture. His hat was in his hand. His hair was damp at the temples. "Morning," he said. "Morning, Mr. Cross." He looked at her across the kitchen. Something passed through his eyes, like he knew she had heard him but could not prove it. Grace turned back to the stove. "Coffee is ready." He sat at the table. She poured him a cup and placed it near his hand. Their fingers almost touched. Almost was enough to make her step back. Nathaniel noticed, but again he said nothing. That was becoming the hardest thing about him. He noticed too much and demanded too little. Eli came in next, followed by Jessie and Cole. The young hand carried a shirt with a torn sleeve rolled under one arm. He tried to hide it behind his back, but Grace saw. "Mr. Jessie," she said, "if that shirt needs mending, set it by the wash basin." Jesse's ears turned red. "I was not going to ask, ma'am. You were going to stand there looking pitiful until someone asked for you." Cole gave a dry laugh into his coffee. Jesse set the shirt down. "Fence nail caught me yesterday." "Did it catch your arm, too?" "No, ma'am, just the shirt." "Then next time, bring it before the tear gets worse." Jesse grinned as if she had handed him a sweet cake instead of a scolding. "Yes, ma'am." Nathaniel watched from the table, one eyebrow lifted. Grace pretended not to see him. After breakfast, the men rode out to the southern range. Grace stayed behind with a house that seemed to grow larger the more she cleaned it. She beat rugs in the yard until dust rose around her like smoke. She washed windows that had not seen clear light in years. She opened trunks in the storage room and found old curtains, cracked dishes, letters tied with ribbon, and a woman's shawl folded so carefully that Grace knew whose it had been before she touched it. Clara's shawl was pale green, soft at the edges from use. Grace should have put it back. Instead, she held it against her chest for one quiet moment. She wondered what kind of woman Clara had been. A woman who played piano badly without shame. A woman who painted porch rails white. A woman who had loved a hard man before he became hard. Grace folded the shawl and returned it to the trunk. Then she closed the lid. Near noon, Eli rode back alone. His horse was wet with sweat. Grace saw him through the kitchen window and stepped onto the porch before he reached the hitching rail. "What happened?" "Boss cut his hand," Eli said. "Not bad, but enough that he is being stubborn about it." That last part should not have worried her. It did anyway. Nathaniel rode in a minute later, holding his left hand wrapped in a dirty cloth. He dismounted with one hand and gave Eli a look sharp enough to cut rope. "I said it was nothing," Nathaniel muttered. Grace came down the steps. "Then you will not mind letting me see nothing." Eli coughed into his fist to hide a smile. Nathaniel looked between them. "Do I still own this ranch?" "Far as I know," Eli said. "Then why does no one listen to me?" "Because you bleed on clean floors," Grace said. Nathaniel's eyes shifted to her, surprised. For one breath his mouth almost softened. Then he walked past her into the house. Grace followed him to the kitchen and pointed at the chair. "Sit." He sat, though his face said he did not enjoy obeying. She unwrapped the cloth. The cut ran across his palm, deep enough to need cleaning but not enough for stitches if he was careful. Bits of dirt clung to the skin. "How did this happen?" "Rope burn and a broken buckle." "That sounds like two things, not one." "It was a busy moment." She poured clean water into a basin. "Busy moments make careless men." "I am not careless." "No, you are proud. It has the same result." Eli made a sound from the doorway and quickly turned it into a cough. Nathaniel glared at him. "Do you have work?" "Yes, boss." Eli vanished at once. Grace cleaned the wound slowly. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but he made no sound. His hand was large and scarred, the hand of a man who had built and buried, held reins and coffins, given orders and maybe once held a baby who never breathed. That thought made her gentler than she meant to be. Nathaniel watched her face. "You have done this before." Grace wrapped the hand with a clean strip of cloth. "People get hurt everywhere." "That is not an answer." "It is the one I have." He leaned back, studying her. "You keep your answers locked up tight." Grace tied the bandage. "Some answers cost too much." His voice lowered. "Does Daniel Bell have anything to do with that cost?" Her fingers froze. The room seemed to tilt. Nathaniel did not move, but the air changed around him. "I saw the name." Grace pulled her hands away. "What name?" "On the paper that slipped from your Bible this morning when you moved it from the table. I did not read it. I saw only the name Daniel Bell and a sheriff's mark." For a moment, Grace could not breathe. Her first instinct was to run. Her second was to lie. Both rose in her like old habits, ready and sharp. Nathaniel stood slowly, keeping his injured hand at his side. "I told you before, I do not like surprises, but I will not drag your secrets out of you." Grace backed toward the stove. "Then why say his name?" "Because when a man's name makes a woman look like the floor has opened under her, that man matters." "He does not matter." "That is another locked answer." Grace's eyes burned. "You do not know what you are asking." "No," he said quietly, "I don't, but I know fear when I see it." The kindness in his voice hurt worse than anger. Grace turned away, gripping the edge of the stove until the heat bit her palms. "He was my husband," she said. Nathaniel went still. "Was?" Grace stared at the black iron beneath her hands. "I do not know." Outside, the wind pushed dust against the window. A horse called from the barn. The whole ranch seemed too quiet. Nathaniel took one step closer, then stopped. "Grace." She shook her head. "No more, not today." He accepted it just like that. No pressing, no demand, no hard hand on her arm. "All right," he said. She wiped her face quickly, angry that tears had come without permission. Nathaniel picked up his hat from the table. At the doorway, he looked back. "For what it is worth, Miss Bell, whatever brought you here, I am not sorry I opened the gate." Then he left. Grace stood in the kitchen long after his footsteps faded, with the smell of biscuits in the air and the past breathing down her neck. That evening, when Nathaniel came in for supper, a small blue ribbon lay beside his plate. He looked at it, then at Grace. She kept her eyes on the stew pot. "You should tie it over the bandage tomorrow. The cloth will come loose when you work." He picked up the ribbon carefully, as if it were not just a scrap of fabric but a fragile truce. "Thank you," he said. Grace nodded. Neither of them spoke of Daniel Bell again that night. But something had shifted between them, not trust yet, not peace, something smaller and more frightening. A door inside Grace had opened 1 inch. And Nathaniel Cross, for all his grief and rough silence, had not tried to force it wider. The blue ribbon changed things more than Grace expected. It was only a strip of cloth, tied over Nathaniel's bandaged hand so the wrap would hold through a day's work. But the next morning, when he came in from the yard with that small piece of blue showing against his rough wrist, every man at the breakfast table noticed. Jesse grinned first. "Boss, that's mighty pretty." Cole looked into his coffee. "Never knew you were a ribbon man." Eli did not smile, but the corners of his beard moved like he was fighting it. Nathaniel sat down slowly and laid his injured hand on the table for all of them to see. "Anyone else got thoughts on my bandage?" The room went quiet. Grace turned toward the stove so they would not see her face. She should have felt embarrassed. Instead, something warm and strange moved through her chest. Nathaniel had worn it. He could have taken it off the moment he left the house. He could have replaced it with plain cloth from the barn. But he had kept it there in front of his men as if her small care was nothing to hide. That was dangerous too. Kindness had a way of slipping past walls that force could never break. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm. Grace rose before dawn, cooked breakfast, cleaned rooms, mended what needed mending, and tended a small patch of earth behind the kitchen where she hoped beans might grow. Nathaniel worked the ranch, coming and going with dust on his boots and that same tired strength in his shoulders. Sometimes he paused in the kitchen for coffee even when he had no reason to. Sometimes Grace found herself listening for his steps before she admitted she was waiting. They spoke more now, but carefully. He told her which horses were gentle and which were fools. She told him her mother used to say bread could tell when a woman was angry because it refused to rise. He told her Clara had once tried to plant roses in July and blamed the soil when they died. Grace almost smiled at that. Not fully, but almost. One evening, a hot wind blew across the ranch so hard it rattled every window in the house. Grace was making supper when Nathaniel came in pale beneath his tan. He leaned one shoulder against the doorframe and tried to look as if standing upright had not become a task. Grace set down the spoon. "Your hand." "It's fine." "You are a poor liar." He pushed away from the doorframe. "Then I'll sit while I lie." He took one step and nearly fell. Grace reached him before he hit the floor. His weight was too much for her, but she braced herself and held on until Eli, hearing the noise, rushed in from outside. "Help me get him to his room," Grace said. Nathaniel muttered something about not needing fussing over. Neither one of them listened. His room was plain, almost bare. Bed, dresser, chair, one shelf of books. Clara's photograph stood near the wash basin, clean of dust. Grace noticed that before she noticed anything else. They laid him on the bed. His skin burned under her hand. Eli looked worried. "Fever." "Yes," Grace said. "Bring clean water, boil more. Tell Jesse to ride for the doctor if this worsens." Nathaniel opened his eyes. "No doctor." Grace leaned over him. "You do not get to give orders when you are half senseless. It's my ranch. And right now it is my sick room." Eli gave one short nod and left fast. Grace unwrapped the bandage. The cut had turned red and swollen. A dark line had started up from the wound toward his wrist. Fear tightened in her stomach, but she did not let it reach her hands. Panic helped no one. "You kept working with this," she said. Nathaniel's eyes were half closed. Cattle do not care if a man's hand hurts. "No, but infection does." She cleaned the wound with hot water and whiskey. Nathaniel gripped the sheet but made no sound. When she had to press around the swelling, his breath caught sharply. "Curse if you need to," she said. "Trying not to offend you. That would offend me less than dying out of politeness." Even fevered, he almost smiled. The night became long and close. Eli came and went with water. Jesse saddled a horse and waited near the barn in case Grace gave the word. Cole kept the fire steady. The whole ranch seemed to understand that the man who held it together was now lying in a bed, fighting something too small to see and too strong to ignore. By midnight, Nathaniel was worse. His fever climbed. He spoke in broken pieces, sometimes to Grace, sometimes to Clara, sometimes to the child who never lived long enough to hear his father's voice. Grace sat beside him with a damp cloth in one hand and fear in the other. "I'm sorry," he whispered once, his face twisted with pain. "Clara, I'm sorry." Grace pressed the cloth to his forehead. "Rest now. Couldn't save you." Her own throat tightened. "You stayed, that matters." He turned his head toward her voice, though his eyes did not open. "Grace." "I'm here." His hand searched weakly across the blanket. She took it before she could think better of it. Toward dawn, the room grew quiet. The fever had not broken, but he had stopped thrashing. Grace thought he was asleep. She was so tired her bones ached, yet she could not leave him. The window showed the first gray line of morning. Clara's photograph watched from the dresser. Grace lowered her head. "Lord," she whispered, barely louder than breath, "I do not ask much from you. Maybe I have no right to ask anything, but do not take him, not this man. He is hard and stubborn and sad, but he is good. He opened a gate when he should have sent me away. He gave me a room with a latch. He let me be silent when I had no words. Please let him live." Her fingers tightened around his. "And if you need to take someone, take the fear out of me. Take the part that still believes every kind hand will turn cruel. Take the part that cannot trust without shaking. But do not take Nathaniel Cross. If this moment reaches something tender in you, stay with the story, because Grace is learning that sometimes the bravest prayer is not for rescue, but for the courage to trust someone who is trying to stay." She wiped her face quickly, ashamed of the tears. Then Nathaniel's fingers moved around hers. His eyes remained closed, but his voice came rough and weak. "Grace." She froze. "You heard." His eyelids lifted, just enough for her to see him looking at her. "Every word," he whispered. The room seemed to fall away. Grace pulled her hand back as if burned, but he held on with what little strength he had. "Don't run from it," he said. Before she could answer, hooves thundered into the yard outside. Eli shouted from below, sharp with alarm. "Rider coming in hard from the east." Grace rose and went to the window. A stranger on a lathered horse was racing toward the house, coat dark with dust, a badge flashing silver on his chest. Grace's whole body went cold. The rider pulled up so hard that dirt sprayed beneath his horse's hooves. The animal tossed its head, sides heaving. The man in the saddle wore a dark coat powdered with trail dust, and the silver badge on his chest caught the morning light like a hard little star. Eli crossed the yard with one hand near his holster. Jesse and Cole came from the barn, both silent now, their faces tight. Grace stood at Nathaniel's bedroom window and felt the old world reach through the glass for her throat. Behind her, Nathaniel tried to sit up. "No," she said quickly, turning from the window. "Stay down." His face was pale, his hair damp with fever, but his eyes had cleared enough to understand. "Who is it?" "A lawman." Nathaniel pushed himself higher against the pillows. "Help me up. You can barely hold your head." "Grace." The way he said her name stopped her, not sharp, not commanding, just steady. "I told you," he said, breath rough, "if trouble came to my land, I needed warning. This is the warning." Grace looked toward the window again. Eli was speaking to the rider now. She could not hear the words, but she saw the stranger glance up at the house. At her. Her knees weakened. Nathaniel reached for the edge of the bed and nearly slipped. Grace caught his arm before he fell. "You stubborn fool," she whispered. "Likely. You are sick. I have been sick before. You could die. Not this morning." His answer was foolish, proud, and so much like him that fear twisted into something close to anger. But she helped him stand. His weight leaned heavy on her shoulder. Each step to the door cost him, though he tried to hide it. By the time they reached the stairs, sweat ran down his temple. Eli entered the front room just as Grace helped Nathaniel down the last step. "Boss," Eli said, eyes widening, "you ought to be in bed." "I hear that often today." The lawman stepped in behind Eli and removed his hat. He was a narrow-faced man in his 50s with a gray mustache and tired eyes. His badge read Deputy Marshal. "Mr. Cross?" he asked. Nathaniel stood straighter, though Grace felt the tremor pass through him. "That is right. I am Deputy Marshal Owen Price out of Fort Worth. I am looking for a woman who may be traveling under the name Grace Bell." Grace's grip tightened around Nathaniel's arm. Nathaniel did not look at her. "You found her." The marshal's eyes moved to Grace. He did not seem cruel. That almost made it worse. Cruel men were easy to understand. Tired men with badges and papers were harder. "Ma'am," he said, "are you Grace Bell, wife of Daniel Bell from Laurel County?" Grace felt every man in the room turn still. "Wife." The word landed like a chain thrown across the floor. She lifted her chin. "Yes." Nathaniel's hand moved slightly, covering hers where it held his sleeve. The marshal reached into his coat and drew out a folded paper. "I have been sent to bring you back for questioning." Eli stepped forward. "Questioning for what?" The marshal looked at him, then at Nathaniel. "This is official business." "This is my house," Nathaniel said. His voice was weak but cold enough to make the room listen. "Speak plain." Marshal Price sighed as if he had ridden too far for pride. "Daniel Bell claims his wife attacked him and fled with money from his home. He says she is unstable and dangerous." Grace almost laughed, but no sound came out. Nathaniel's jaw hardened. Did he also say why she fled? That is what the hearing will settle. Hearing? Grace asked. The marshal nodded. Daniel Bell did not die, if that is what you feared. He recovered. He has filed a complaint. He wants you returned. The room tilted around her. Daniel alive. Daniel speaking. Daniel turning himself into the wounded man and her into the danger. Of course he would. Men like Daniel did not need truth. They only needed a story told first. Grace looked at Nathaniel, expecting doubt. Some small shadow of it. Some flicker that said maybe he wondered if he had let a criminal into his home. There was none. Only fury held tightly behind his eyes. She is not going anywhere today, Nathaniel said. The marshal's face grew careful. Mr. Cross, I have papers. And I have a woman under my roof who has not slept, a ranch full of witnesses, and enough respect for the law to expect it not to drag a sick and frightened woman across the country on one man's word. Marshal Price looked at Grace again. This time his gaze softened a little. Ma'am, he said, did Daniel Bell hurt you? Grace heard Daniel's voice in her memory, heard plates breaking, heard apologies after, heard the sheriff back home telling her marriage was a private matter. Her chest tightened so hard she almost chose silence. Then she looked at Nathaniel. He stood beside her, fevered and shaking but still standing. He had heard her prayer and had not turned away. Grace took one breath. Yes, she said, he hurt me for years. The room went very quiet. She kept speaking before fear could steal her voice. I tried to leave before. No one helped me. That night he came at me again. I fought back because I thought if I did not, he would bury me before morning. I took no money except what little was mine. I ran because staying meant dying slowly. Marshal Price looked down at the folded paper. Eli spoke next, his voice low. I believe her. So do I, Jesse said from the doorway. Cole nodded once, same. Nathaniel's hand tightened on Grace's. You came for the truth, Marshal. There it is. The marshal rubbed one hand over his face. For the first time, he looked less like the law and more like a man who had seen too many ugly homes from the inside. I cannot ignore papers, he said. No, Nathaniel answered. But you can wait. Send word to Fort Worth that Grace Bell will answer questions here with witnesses and counsel present. You can also send word to Laurel County asking for records, doctors, neighbors, anyone honest enough to speak. The marshal studied him. You have counsel. I will. Eli stepped closer. My brother is a judge in Austin. He knows good lawyers. Grace turned to him, stunned. Eli only shrugged. Told you, ma'am, we look after our own. Our own. Those two words nearly undid her. Marshal Price folded the paper again. I can give you 3 days, no more. I will stay in town. If she runs, I come back with more than papers. She will not run, Nathaniel said. Grace felt her heart strike against her ribs. The marshal looked at her. Is that true? Every old instinct screamed at her to flee before sunset. Pack the bag, take the road, become a shadow again. But she was tired of shadows. Grace lifted her chin. Yes, it is true. The marshal nodded, put on his hat and left. Only when the hoofbeats faded did Nathaniel's strength fail. He swayed hard. Grace and Eli caught him together. Bed, Grace said, fear rushing back. Now. Nathaniel looked at her as they helped him toward the stairs. His face was gray, but his eyes were clear. You prayed for courage, he whispered. Grace swallowed against the ache in her throat. I suppose I did. Looks like God heard you. Before she could answer, Nathaniel's eyes rolled shut, and his weight dropped heavy in her arms. Nathaniel did not wake for almost an hour. Grace sat beside his bed with one hand pressed against his fevered wrist. counting the beat of his pulse like a woman counting coins she could not afford to lose. His skin burned worse than before. The wound in his palm had swollen again, angry and red beneath the clean bandage. Eli stood near the door, hat in both hands. He looked like he wanted to break something and did not know what. "I should have sent for the doctor sooner," Grace said. "You were tending him best anyone could." "Best is not always enough." Eli looked at Nathaniel, then back at her. "Jesse is already riding. He'll bring the doctor from town if he has to tie him to the saddle." Grace nodded, but it gave her little comfort. Nathaniel stirred, his face tightening. A broken sound left him, low and full of pain. Grace leaned closer. "I'm here," she whispered. "You are in your own bed. You are safe." His eyes moved beneath closed lids. "Clara." Grace froze. Eli looked down. For a moment, Grace could not answer. Then she took a breath and touched the damp cloth to Nathaniel's forehead. "No," she said softly, "it's Grace." Nathaniel's brow eased, as if even in fever he knew that name mattered. "Don't run," he murmured. The word struck her in the chest. "I won't." She did not know if he heard her, but she said it again. "I won't run." By noon, the doctor arrived in a sweat-dark coat, carrying a leather bag and a face full of impatience. He was a small man named Dr. Whitcomb, with sharp eyes and hands that moved faster than his mouth. He took one look at Nathaniel's wound and muttered that stubborn ranchers were a plague no medicine could cure. Grace stepped back only when he told her to, and even then she stayed near enough to see everything. Dr. Whitcomb opened the wound to clean it properly. Nathaniel woke during it, jaw clenched, his good hand gripping the blanket. He did not cry out, but Grace saw the pain cut through him. She wanted to look away. She did not. When it was done, the doctor washed his hands in a basin gone pink and gray. "He has blood poisoning starting," he said. "Not too far if God is kind and he stays still." "He will stay still," Grace said. Dr. Whitcomb looked at Nathaniel. "Will he?" Nathaniel's eyes were half open. "Seems I have no vote." "Good," the doctor said. "Voting would kill you." Eli almost smiled for the first time all day. The doctor left medicine, strict orders, and a warning that fever could turn fast. Then he went downstairs to eat the plate Grace had made for him before riding back to town. Grace remained with Nathaniel. The house changed around his sick room. Eli took charge of the ranch. Cole slept in the chair near the front door. Jesse rode messages between Iron Creek and town. No one said it plainly, but every man understood two things at once. Nathaniel might die. And the law was waiting. That evening, Eli brought Grace a telegram form and a pencil. "My brother's name is Thomas Mercer," he said. "He's a judge in Austin. I sent word already, but you need to write what happened in your own hand. Not fancy, just true." Grace stared at the paper. The truth looked smaller than she expected when it waited on a blank page. "What if they don't believe me?" Eli set the pencil down beside her. "Then we say it louder." Grace looked at him. He shrugged. "Truth ain't weak just because men ignore it." So she wrote. At first her hand shook so badly the words leaned across the page. She wrote Daniel Bell's name. She wrote about the first year when his voice had been sweet in public and sharp behind closed doors. She wrote about the broken dishes, the locked doors, the bruises hidden under sleeves. She wrote about the night she fought back with the only strength she had left. She did not make herself sound innocent. She made herself sound real. When she finished, her fingers were stiff and ink marked the side of her hand. Eli read none of it. He folded the paper, placed it in an envelope, and said, "Jesse will write it before dawn." "Thank you," Grace said. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when this is over." But Grace knew something had already changed. For years, Daniel's story had chased her. Now at last, her own words were riding out to meet it. Night fell heavy. Nathaniel slept, then woke, then slept again. Near midnight, Grace sat by his bed with the lamp turned low. His breathing had steadied. The fever still held him, but not as cruelly. He opened his eyes. "Marshall," he whispered. "In town. You still here?" "Yes." His gaze found her through the dim light. "Good." She tried to smile. It failed. "You scared me." "I scared myself." "That is new." His mouth moved faintly. "Don't tell Eli." "He already knows." Nathaniel closed his eyes, then opened them again. "Grace, whatever they say, whatever papers come, you tell the truth." "I wrote it down." "All of it?" She looked at her hands. "Enough." "No," he said, voice weak but firm. "All of it. Shame belongs to the one who caused the wound, not the one who carried it." The words broke something open in her, but gently this time. She bowed her head and let the tears fall where he could not see them. "I don't know how to stand in front of men and say those things." "Then look at me." She lifted her eyes. Nathaniel's face was pale against the pillow. "If they make you speak, look at me and say it. I'll hear you." Grace reached for his good hand. This time, when his fingers closed around hers, she did not pull away. Morning brought a gray sky and wind from the east. Jesse rode out with Grace's statement. Dr. Whitcomb came again and said Nathaniel had made it through the worst, though he still needed rest. Eli checked the fences twice. Cole kept watch from the barn roof with a rifle across his knees. By the third day, Iron Creek Ranch no longer felt like only a ranch. It felt like a place holding its breath before a storm. Near sundown, the storm arrived. A wagon came first, then two riders behind it. Grace saw them from the sitting room window. The marshal rode on one side. A man in a brown suit rode on the other. And seated in the wagon, straight-backed and smiling like he had every right to come home, was Daniel Bell. Grace's fingers went numb on the curtain. Behind her, Nathaniel stood in the hallway, pale but upright, one hand braced against the wall. Daniel climbed down from the wagon and looked toward the house. Then he called loud enough for every man in the yard to hear. "I've come to take my wife back." Daniel Bell's voice rolled across the yard like a storm cloud. "I've come to take my wife back." No one moved at first. The horses stood still at the rail. The wagon wheels creaked once as the driver shifted his weight. Dust hung in the orange evening light, turning every face hard and strange. Grace stood inside the doorway with one hand pressed against the wood. Her body remembered Daniel before her mind could stop it. Her shoulders tightened. Her breath grew small. Some part of her wanted to step backward, find the kitchen, find the knife, find any corner where she could become invisible again. But then she felt Nathaniel beside her. He was weak. Fever had left him pale, and one hand still gripped the wall for balance. Yet he stood between Grace and the open yard like a man made of stone. Eli crossed from the barn first. Cole and Jesse followed. None of them drew a weapon, but every hand stayed close enough to one. Marshal Price dismounted and raised a palm. "No one is here for trouble." Daniel smiled. "That depends on whether my wife chooses sense or shame." Grace flinched at the word wife. Nathaniel heard it. "She has a name," he said. Daniel looked toward him. "And you must be the rancher who has been sheltering stolen goods." Eli took one hard step forward, but Nathaniel lifted his good hand. "Careful," Nathaniel said. "You are standing on my land." Daniel's smile tightened. He looked older than the photograph Grace kept hidden. Thinner, too, but his eyes had not changed. They still held that same cruel certainty, that belief that if he spoke long enough and loud enough, the world would bend around him. The man in the brown suit stepped forward. "My name is Milton Sayer. I represent Mr. Bell. We have lawful papers and a sworn complaint. Mrs. Bell is accused of assault, theft, and desertion. My client asks only that the law be honored." Grace almost laughed. Asks only. Daniel had always known how to dress his wants in clean words. Marshal Price looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Cross, I gave my word she would have time. That still stands, but Mr. Bell insisted on being present." "I bet he did," Eli muttered. Daniel's gaze slid to Grace. "Come out here and speak to me like a proper wife." The old fear rose fast, but this time anger rose with it. Grace stepped onto the porch. Nathaniel turned his head sharply. "Grace." "I'm not hiding behind you," she said quietly. His eyes searched hers. Whatever he saw there made him step aside, though not far. Grace walked to the top porch step. Her dress moved in the warm wind. Her hands trembled, so she folded them together. "I am not going anywhere with you, Daniel." His face softened in a way she knew too well. A false softness. One he had used in front of neighbors, church ladies, storekeepers, and anyone else he wished to fool. "Grace, you are upset. You have been confused for months. I know you think I am your enemy, but I am your husband. I forgive you." There it was, that same poison in a holy cup. "You forgive me," she said. "Yes. For surviving you." His mouth twitched. Grace came down one more step. "Did you tell Marshal Price why I struck you?" "I told him you attacked me." "Did you tell him you had thrown me against the stove first?" Daniel's eyes hardened. "That is not true." Grace lifted her sleeve. The scar along her forearm caught the light. Pale, twisted, and long. A mark she had hidden for years because shame had made her think the wound belonged to her. Now she held it out for everyone to see. "This is true," she said. The yard went silent. Jesse looked away first, his young face full of pain. Cole's jaw worked as if he were grinding down words he could not say. Eli stared at Daniel with such cold dislike that even Sayer shifted uneasily. Daniel pointed at her arm. She burned herself cooking. She was always careless. Grace looked at Marshal Price. "Ask him how many times I was careless. Ask him why I wore long sleeves in July. Ask him why the doctor in Laurel County treated cracked ribs but wrote down that I fell from porch steps. Ask him why my cousin sent me back after he came with flowers and promises." Marshal Price's face changed. Daniel saw it and grew sharp. "You have no proof." "No," Grace said. "I had bruises. Then they faded. I had witnesses. They looked away. I had a voice. No one wanted to hear it." Nathaniel's eyes shone with fierce pride, but he stayed quiet. This was her moment, and he knew better than to take it. If Grace's courage has touched your heart, hold close to this part of the story, because the truth is finally stepping into daylight, and daylight changes everything it touches. Milton Sayer cleared his throat. "This is emotional talk, not evidence." A rider came hard from the road before anyone could answer. Every head turned. It was Jesse's younger brother, Luke, a boy of 16 who sometimes carried mail from town. He pulled up near the porch, breathless, and waved a sealed envelope. "From Austin," he called, "for Eli Mercer, urgent." Eli took it fast and broke the seal. His eyes moved across the page. Then he looked at Grace. "My brother is coming," he said. "He sent a lawyer ahead, says not to let anyone move you from this ranch until he arrives." Sayer frowned. "Your brother has no authority here." Eli looked at Marshal Price. "Judge Thomas Mercer says he does." The marshal took the letter and read it. His shoulders eased a little. "Mrs. Bell stays here tonight," he said. "No argument." Daniel's face darkened. "She is my wife." Marshal Price folded the letter. "And tomorrow she will be a witness under protection until this matter is heard properly." Grace felt the words land deep inside her. Witness. Not prisoner, not runaway, not property. Witness. Daniel took one step toward the porch. Nathaniel moved before anyone else could. Sick or not, he came down the steps and stood in front of Grace. "That is close enough," Nathaniel said. Daniel stared at him with pure hate. "You think she belongs to you now?" Nathaniel's voice was low. "No, that is the difference between us." For the first time, Daniel had no answer. Marshal Price ordered him back to the wagon. Sayre argued under his breath, but the marshal was done listening. Eli and Cole stood nearby until Daniel climbed in. As the wagon turned, Daniel looked past Nathaniel to Grace. "This is not over," he called. Grace's hand shook again, but she did not step back. "No," she said softly, though he could not hear, "but I am not the woman you chased anymore." The wagon rolled away toward town, with the marshal riding beside it. Only when the dust faded did Nathaniel sway. Grace caught his arm. Eli came fast to help, but Nathaniel kept his eyes on her. "You stood," he whispered. Grace looked down the empty road. "Yes," she said, "now I have to keep standing." That night, after Nathaniel was back in bed and the ranch had gone quiet, Grace opened the cloth bundle beneath her mattress and took out the sheriff's notice, the ring, and the torn photograph. One by one, she laid them on the table. Tomorrow, she would carry them into the light. And whatever Daniel Bell had waiting in town, she would meet it with her name, her scars, and the truth. By dawn, Iron Creek Ranch looked ready for battle, though no one said the word. Eli had men posted at the gate. Cole checked the rifles and set them back in the rack. Jesse paced near the barn until Grace told him his worry was wearing a trail into the dirt. Nathaniel sat at the kitchen table with a blanket over his shoulders and a cup of coffee he was not allowed to drink strong. Grace stood at the stove, making breakfast because her hands needed work. If she stopped moving, she would hear Daniel's voice again. "My wife." She cracked eggs into a pan and watched the yellow spread. Nathaniel's voice came from behind her. "You don't have to go today." Grace did not turn. "Yes, I do. We can ask for more time. I have spent 7 months asking time to carry me farther from him. It did not. Today, I stop asking the road to save me." Nathaniel was quiet. Then his chair scraped softly. He came to stand near her, still pale, still weak, but dressed and stubborn. "Then I go with you." "You should be in bed." "Likely. Dr. Whitcomb will skin me if that fever returns." "Then we won't tell him." Grace finally looked at him, and despite everything, a small smile touched her mouth. It was gone quickly, but Nathaniel saw it. His face softened like that little smile had been worth all the pain in his hand. Eli entered before anything more could pass between them. "Lawyers here." The man from Austin was named Mr. Abram Reed. He was not what Grace expected. No fancy hat, no silver watch, no loud voice. He was thin, dark-skinned from travel, with serious eyes and a leather case full of papers. He bowed to Grace as if she were a lady walking into church instead of a runaway woman with a sheriff's notice in her bag. "Mrs. Bell," he said, "Judge Mercer sent me. I read your statement on the ride. I believe you." Grace had not known 4 words could hold so much weight. At 10 o'clock they rode to town in 2 wagons. Nathaniel sat beside Grace, his injured hand wrapped clean. Eli and Mr. Reed sat across from them. Jesse and Cole followed on horseback. The town hall was small and smelled of pine boards, dust, and old tobacco. Marshal Price had arranged chairs before a long table. Daniel sat on one side with Milton Sayre. He wore a clean coat and had combed his hair smooth. Anyone walking in without knowing better might have thought him respectable. Grace knew better. Daniel looked at her as she entered. His eyes dropped to Nathaniel's hand resting near hers, and his mouth tightened. Marshal Price stood. "This is not a trial. This is a sworn hearing to decide whether Mrs. Bell is to be returned east or allowed to answer claims here with proper counsel. Everyone will speak plain and keep order." Daniel smiled faintly. I have no trouble with truth. Grace sat down and folded her hands in her lap. Mr. Sayer spoke first. He painted Daniel as a wounded husband, a patient man, a victim of a troubled wife who had lost her senses and fled after a fit of violence. He mentioned stolen money, a missing ring, a home abandoned. Grace listened to every word. Strangely, his lies did not make her feel smaller. They made her feel clear. When Mr. Reed rose, he did not shout. He simply placed Grace's written statement on the table. Then he placed the sheriff's notice beside it. Then the torn photograph. Then the silver wedding ring. My client did not hide these things because she was guilty, he said. She carried them because fear makes people hold proof even when proof hurts them. Marshal Price looked at Grace. Mrs. Bell, tell us what happened the night you left. Grace's breath caught. Nathaniel sat beside her, silent and steady. She remembered what he had said. Look at me. So she did. She looked at Nathaniel, not Daniel, not the marshal, not the lawyer. She looked at the man who had heard her prayer and stayed. Then she told the truth. She told them about the first bruise, the first apology, the first time Daniel locked the door and said a wife did not leave her husband's house without permission. She told them about hiding marks beneath sleeves, about neighbors hearing and pretending not to, about walking to the sheriff and being sent home like a misbehaving child. Her voice shook at first, then it steadied. Daniel interrupted twice. Marshal Price warned him twice. When Grace came to the night she ran, the room seemed to shrink around her. He shoved me against the stove, she said, lifting her scarred arm. I thought he would not stop. I grabbed the pan because it was there. I struck him once. I did not stay to see if he lived because I believed staying would mean my death. I took my mother's Bible, 2 dresses, and $3 I had hidden in a flour jar. That is the theft he speaks of. Daniel stood so fast his chair scraped. She is lying. Nathaniel rose halfway, but Grace touched his sleeve. Mr. Reed turned to Daniel. Then answer this. Why did you follow her across 3 states if all you wanted was justice? She is my wife. No, why did you need her back so badly? Daniel's face changed. Mr. Reed opened another paper from his case. Grace's mother left her a share in a boarding house in St. Louis, small but valuable enough. It cannot be sold without Grace's signature. Daniel Bell has been trying to sell it for months. Grace stared at the paper. My mother's boarding house, she whispered. Mr. Reed looked at her gently. Yes, Judge Mercer found the record. Daniel's mask slipped. For one ugly second, the whole room saw him. She owes me, he snapped. After what she did, she owes me something. The words hung there, plain and damning. Marshal Price's face hardened. Mr. Bell, sit down. But Daniel was beyond caution now. He pointed at Grace. You think these people care about you. You think that rancher loves you. He pities you. That is all a woman like you can get. Grace stood. The room fell silent. No, she said, her voice calm. Pity is what kept me small. This is not pity. This is people finally seeing me. Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came. Marshal Price turned to Mr. Reed. I have heard enough for today. Mrs. Bell will not be taken east. Grace closed her eyes. Then the marshal added, but there is still the matter of legal marriage and the complaint filed in Laurel County. Until higher authority settles it, Daniel Bell still has a claim under law. The relief in Grace's chest cracked. Nathaniel's hand found hers. Mr. Reed leaned toward her and spoke quietly. This is not defeat. This is the last hill before daylight. Outside, church bells began to ring for noon. Daniel smiled again, thin and cruel as if one chain still held. And Grace realized that freedom was closer than it had ever been, but Daniel Bell still had one final hold on her name. The last hold Daniel Bell had on Grace was not love. not truth, and not even law. It was a name. That was what Mr. Reed told her in the quiet room behind the town hall, while Nathaniel sat beside her with his injured hand resting on the table. Eli stood near the window, watching the street below. Outside, Daniel Bell waited with his lawyer, still wearing the thin smile of a man who believed one chain was enough if it was locked tight. "He will use the marriage bond as long as he can," Mr. Reed said. "Not because he wants you home, Mrs. Bell, because he wants your signature." Grace looked down at the silver ring on the table. "For my mother's boarding house." "Yes. I thought it was gone." "It is not gone. Your mother left her share to you. Daniel tried to claim control through marriage, but the title is written in your name as heir. He cannot sell it without you." The room grew still. Grace had carried shame for so long that she had not noticed there might be something else buried under it. Not wealth, not freedom by itself, but proof that her mother had loved her enough to leave her something Daniel could not beat out of her. Nathaniel's voice was quiet. "What happens now?" Mr. Reed folded his papers. "Judge Mercer is expected by evening. Once he arrives, we petition for immediate protection, dismissal of the return order, and a civil separation until a divorce can be heard. Daniel may fight it, but after what he said today, and with the property motive clear, his ground is crumbling." Grace looked toward the door. "Crumbled ground still holds a man if he refuses to move." Mr. Reed studied her with respect. "Then we push." By sunset, the town hall filled again. Judge Thomas Mercer arrived with road dust on his coat and authority in every step. He was Eli's older brother, but the two men looked nothing alike. Eli was broad and weathered. Thomas was lean, silver-haired, and sharp-eyed, with a voice that made even proud men sit straighter. Daniel's smile faded when the judge entered. The hearing lasted less than an hour. Mr. Reed placed the documents before the judge. Grace's statement, the doctor's notes from Laurel County, a letter from her cousin admitting Daniel had brought Grace back by force after she tried to leave, the property record from St. Louis. Then came the final paper, the one Mr. Reed had kept hidden until that moment. It was a letter Daniel had written to a broker. "Grace Bell is unstable," the letter said. "Once I bring her home, I will have her sign what is needed." Daniel went pale. Judge Mercer read the line twice, then he looked over his spectacles. "Mr. Bell, did you write this?" Daniel's lawyer closed his eyes, as if he already knew the answer. Daniel said nothing. That silence told the truth better than any confession could. Judge Mercer's voice turned cold. "Mrs. Bell will not be returned to Laurel County. The complaint against her is tainted by clear personal interest, coercion, and evidence of cruelty. Deputy Marshal Price, you will note that this woman came forward, answered questions, and presented credible witness and record. She is not to be treated as a fugitive." Marshal Price nodded. "Yes, Judge." Daniel stood suddenly. "She is still my wife." Grace rose before Nathaniel could. For once, she did not look at Nathaniel for courage. She felt it in her own bones. "No," she said. "I was your wife when I was afraid. I was your wife when I believed silence was the price of breathing. I was your wife when every door felt locked. But I am not that woman anymore." Daniel's face twisted. "Law says different." Judge Mercer struck the table once with his palm. "And the law is speaking now." The room fell silent. The judge granted Grace protection from Daniel, opened the path for divorce, and ordered that any claim on her mother's property be frozen until the court settled it. Daniel was warned that if he came near Iron Creek Ranch or Grace again, he would face arrest. It was not thunderous justice, no grand punishment, no sudden ruin. It was better. It was truth, written down where Daniel could not tear it up. Outside the hall, twilight covered the street in soft blue shadow. Daniel climbed into his wagon without looking at Grace. For years, She had imagined that moment. She had thought freedom would feel like fire, like shouting, like revenge. Instead, it felt like taking a full breath after years underground. Nathaniel stood beside her. "Are you all right?" Grace looked at the ring in her palm. Then she walked to the horse trough, dropped the ring into the water and watched it sink. "Yes," she said, "for the first time I think I am." If Grace's journey has stayed with you, remember this. Sometimes healing does not arrive with loud victory. Sometimes it comes as one quiet breath, one open door, and one brave step away from the past. They returned to Iron Creek beneath a sky bright with stars. Eli rode ahead, Jesse and Cole behind, and Nathaniel sat beside Grace in the wagon, tired but peaceful. His fever had broken. His hand still hurt, but he no longer looked like a man standing halfway between life and grave. At the ranch, the men had left lanterns burning along the porch rail. The little lights trembled in the wind like welcome candles. Grace stepped down and looked at the house. The same house that had once seemed hollow. The same house where Clara's piano waited under a clean cloth, where dust had given way to warmth, where a woman with a hidden notice and bleeding feet had been given a room with a latch. Nathaniel came to stand beside her. "You do not have to stay as hired help," he said. "Not if that name feels too heavy now." Grace looked at him. "What would I stay as?" He swallowed. For all his strength, the question made him look almost afraid. "As Grace, just Grace, for as long as you want, no debt, no demand." She reached for his bandaged hand, careful of the wound. "I want to stay," she said. "Not because I have nowhere else to run, but because I am done running." The wind moved across the yard. A horse shifted in the barn. Somewhere in the dark, Eli pretended not to be listening. Nathaniel's eyes shone, but he did not pull her close. He waited. So Grace chose. She stepped forward and rested her forehead against his chest. His arms came around her gently, loose enough to leave, steady enough to trust. On the hill behind the house, the old oak stood against the stars, guarding the graves of the woman and child Nathaniel had loved and lost. Down below, in the lantern glow, another woman closed her eyes and felt life begin again. Grace had come to Iron Creek carrying a bag, a secret and a broken name. She stayed with empty hands, an honest heart, and a future no man owned. And when morning came, she opened the kitchen window, tied the blue ribbon around the curtain, and let the whole house fill with light.